You finally got into the majority thanks to this move of Jim Jeffords, and had just a heck of a time managing those Democrats throughout the entire time that you were managing them, either from majority leader or minority leader. When President Bush, as of one of his very first acts, wanted to have the Congress pass his what wound up to be a $1.2 trillion tax cut, it was larger than that to begin with. uh, Democrats, several of them, went along and supported it, even though Democrats generally were against it. What were the dynamics in those days that were causing those Democrats to feel that they should support the president in something that perhaps some of those who voted yes didn't really believe?
Well, I think it was a couple of things. First of all, after 9/11, the president, the president's popularity soared. I mean, he was up in the 80s at one point, hard as that is to believe now. And because he was so incredibly popular, and because we had a surplus, uh, there were a few of my colleagues who felt that the combination of concern about their own future elections, concern about taking on a popular president, and a cushion of budget surplus gave them a little more flexibility and freedom to to ultimately side with the president against the caucus when it came to something of this import. And you know, it's one of my greater disappointments, frankly, because I think so much of what we're now facing, deficit-wise, and the disparity between the rich and the poor in this country, came in part from that huge tax cut.
Well, I wonder if this is an example of the difficulty that Democrats had during your time there, settling on what they were for. Because I wonder what do you think that there was, even though President Bush did certainly not come into office with a mandate in 2000, do you think that there has been sort of ongoing pressure on Democrats that's been hard for the leadership to manage to be more conservative because the country generally has embraced conservative office holders?
Well, I actually think 9/11 changed everything, Linda. Before 9/11, the president was really struggling. I mean, there were numbers that showed he was having trouble with his own party, and there was a sense of drift, and it was amazing in that short period of time. He never really was able to put it together, and in part because of the narrowness of his election, in part because some of his arrogance was already coming through, and I think 9/11, of course, gave everybody a pause. I mean, it caused everybody to pause and to look at him in a different light. He was now leader in a crisis, and for a period of time, he filled that role very, very well. He appeared to be strong, resolute. He had Democrats and Republicans supporting this effort to respond to the terrorist attacks in a way that united the country. And it was only when he decided to use that incredible power that he had acquired through 9/11 on other issues like the tax cut and going to war and other things that were not directly related to the response to the terrorist attack that the divisions start showing up again. But I think Democrats were very concerned about taking on a president of his popularity and looking un-American, or in fact, I was accused of being un-American many, many times and unpatriotic. And I think that was the fear. People were concerned about that rap, and that, to a certain extent, was a major factor in keeping the unity within our caucus.
Well, and I definitely want to ask you many questions about the events, political events around 9/11, but I want to go back to something you just said. You didn't hesitate to say that President Bush shows his arrogance. Was a word you used. And I noticed when I was reading your book that you described him as having had a swagger when you first met him. I want to just take you back for a minute before we go forward to 9/11. to the time we were talking about when there'd been a closely contested election. There were very bruised feelings on all sides. How did he handle that in your memory when you first began dealing with him before September 11th, when there was this very sharp and painful divide between the parties? How did he behave? How did he handle that from your perspective? And what impact did his behavior have on relations at that time?
Well, initially, I think he handled it reasonably well. He made it a point shortly after that decision by the Supreme Court to come to the Hill and to talk to the four leaders personally. And I'll never forget his first visit in my office. He shook, I had some swing doors that kind of like a bar, a Western bar. They just swung. And I can still recall coming through the door, just kind of banging the doors open and just, with that swagger, just shaking everybody's hand. And then coming into my office and sitting down, and we started talking about what kind of relationship we hoped we could have. And I thought it was an odd conversation for a couple of reasons. One, his very first statement to me, at least that I can recall, was, "I hope you never lie to me." And I thought that was really an odd thing to say to somebody you hardly knew. And what else could I say but, "I hope you never lie to me." And so we started in a cumbersome way. And then the second thing he said is, "I just want you to know I'm in charge." And I'm thinking, why would he feel the need to say he's in charge? The Supreme Court just made him President of the United States of America, and he's telling the Democratic leader of the Senate that he's in charge. I quizzed him about what caused him to feel the need to express himself that way, and he said, "Well, there's been some talk about the role the vice president's going to have, and I just want you to know the decisions are going to come to my desk." And so we got through that, and then the other thing he said, we got into a little bit of a debate about alternative energy, which I care about deeply, and he said, "There's only one real word for my energy policy. That's drill." And so we got into a discussion about the efficacy of drilling as an energy policy. But so it was an odd conversation overall, but the fact that he made the effort to come to my office was something that I felt was of value, and it was a nice gesture. He then also offered to speak to my caucus. We were going to have a one-day retreat, and so he actually came to the caucus and said a few words and answered a couple of questions, and so he got off to kind of the right start. And then about a month after that, invited my wife and I to the residence for a dinner, and we had a quiet, private dinner, and so it started off well, but it didn't last.
Did you ever really have a relationship, do you think, with each other?
Well, right after 9/11, there was about 6 weeks, 6 weeks to 2 months, where we talked almost every day. We really shared a lot of things and developed kind of a rapport and a friendship that I thought was beginning to feel kind of a natural affinity, but it didn't, as I say, it didn't last in part because I think he and his people felt the need to take that popularity and use it for their agenda, which of course they did with the tax cut and with a lot of other things that I disagreed with.